Yeah, I'm Dr. Carrine Teoh. I'm a CISSP and CBCP. I'm a CSO in Bond Holdings. So for today, I'll be talking about the emerging zero trust future. So for the past couple of years, this is the new normal for many of us. Okay, working from home, working remotely, working with children running behind us and so forth. So the COVID-19 pandemic have forced all industry to radically shift their operations into a more distributed network to support remote work. So this is an era where working from the office 5 days a week is long gone. I would say that a lot of us, many of us, if not all of us, was actually unprepared, and so are the organizations. So some are more prepared than the others, and some was into survival mode, shifting the organizations into online and also shifting the workforce to work from home. As the countless devices that are scattered worldwide that are connected to our business network right now, so should we trust them? As business continue to embrace working remotely, new approaches to cohesive business function will also bring new threats. So in fact, companies nowadays are facing more security threats, exposed to more security risks than ever before. As a result of this distributed business model, employees are accessing mission-critical IT networks, data, applications, and other confidential information from countless different sources and devices. So while this is favorable for many employees, so it also created new opportunity for security threats, challenges, and for attacks to emerge. So ensuring that cyber hygiene for employees is simplified in an office setting, because we make sure that we have the physical security, we have the network security, and the connectivity. But however, in this distributed office setup, organization can't control which networks and devices their employees are using to access company data and information. So if the employees are working from remote locations, how can we establish contextual relationships with them to ensure that they are who they say they are? How do you validate the devices, application that they're using and connected to your system and data? How do you ensure that the networks they are connecting to are secure? There's a difference between from working in an office setting versus a personal network or public Wi-Fi from a coffee shop. So this is why it can be very challenging for the security team for any organization. This is trend and challenges that we are seeing nowadays. This is from the CISO workshop in 2019. So attackers nowadays are using identity to bypass network control, because network controls and network security is no longer as what it used to be. We are no longer in the castle and moat approach in terms of security. Passwords aren't enough to protect identities. So now we're looking into multiple. Besides the machine identity, we have the human login, we have the other ways to authenticate a person before they actually embark into organizations. And then identities now are used outside the network. So this is more exponential in use. The growth is tremendous for the past couple of years. So a lot more cloud services, mobile, IoT assets are now frequently into the enterprise network and organization. So identity and access control are now inconsistent on different cloud services and devices. How do we manage that? So why are we having a zero trust conversation today? So this is because what we want is to keep the assets away from the attackers. So what are our assets? As we know before that, a lot of time assets are measured into brick and mortar. Assets are measured in infrastructure. It's protected by network and so forth. But now the new oil in this current era is data. So data is our biggest asset of all. So, and IT security is getting more complex. There are many more devices, users, connection, multiple facets, different type of connections and different of devices. Some devices are from the organization, some devices are BYOD. So how do you control that? How do you manage that? And then trusted network security strategy is, I would say, the old approach methodology. Trusted network, how do you give a total access for everyone who have access to the network? So that is the old way of accessing into the company organization network, and you're free to roam around in terms of accessing data, accessing applications, and so forth. So this seems to be simple and economical, but with the new way of doing business, with a new way of working from home, new way of challenges and the cybersecurity threats, the trusted network strategy have to be rethink nowadays. And then assets nowadays are increasingly leaving the network. So we have a lot more BYOD, work from home, mobile, and also SaaS applications. And then attackers are shifting into identity attacks. And then identity attacks, not only they actually can gain our password, our login, and also our machines. Nowadays, they have multiple, I would say, sophisticated methods, including social engineering. That is something that technology can enforce and secure so much. And there are certain, I would say, soft approach that we still need to address moving forward. So this is a report that was done in 2020. So basically, this is to emphasize that data is the key to recovery, especially we are in the midst of recovery post-pandemic. 1% of IT decision makers actually have said that onset of COVID-19, the awareness of data importance in decision making has increased, so that we know that data that we collect, the data that we mix and analyze and we output from, this is the one that is going to be critical and crucial for recovery of any businesses. And then 82% are accelerating plans to move data and key business into cloud as a result. So how do we secure that? So this is how the evolution of security parameters. So yes, we started off with the castle and the moat approach, where a lot of time was in the previous generations talking about security or physical security. Then we move into securing the network. And then how do you give access to the network? And once you have access to the network, yes, you are in. But that actually exposed us to a lot of the threats of the insider. So we actually might have an insider that's in the network and actually been, how would say that, compromising the security of the company. And so now we are moving into identity security. So this is how the movement is going into. So this is what we're talking about, zero trust. So zero trust is actually not a technology. Zero trust is not a product. Zero trust is a mindset, it's a model, it's a strategy that suggests that no user, even if allowed onto the network, should be trusted by default because they could be compromised. So this is focusing on identity and device authentication. So instead of just authentication at the perimeter, it's authentication at every step of the way. So we see a lot of micro-segmentation in the whole network. How do you segmentize it? And for every segmentation, there is another authentication and validation that is needed. So this is essentially an ongoing verification process that takes place whenever a device tries to obtain access or to connect to a business network. So a zero trust actually analyzes various pieces of information to confirm one's identity before granting access to the network. It actually can include a combination of numerous strategies, including micro-segmentation of the networks, authentication of the users, and verification of the secure network. So as I mentioned earlier on, zero trust, it is actually essentially a strategy. It is a mindset. It is not a product, and it is a long-term commitment and is ever evolving. So there is no such thing as zero trust is done and it is already for as the time goes and everything. So as we know that threats and risks are ever changing, so is our strategy in zero trust. It should be ever evolving, and it is a long-term, I would say, commitment. Okay, zero trust, we can look into what are the quick wins in zero trust, and we have to look into what are the long-term plan in terms of zero trust for the organization. So what are the zero trust principles? So the zero trust principles look into, we need to verify explicitly. So basically we need to authenticate and authorize based on available data points. Things such as your identity, your location, your device, data classification, and any anomalies. So these are the things that, for example, you have a remote login for your employees that's working from home. So, but now you have a request for authentication that is coming from Korea, from Japan, or from another part of the world, and you know for sure that you do not have any employees that is working from home so far away. So these are things that you can actually first off validate. And zero trust also look into least privileges. So basically in terms of access, privilege, right, entitlement for access into the network, zero trust always look into the bare minimum, the least privilege, need to know basis and need to access basis only. So this one also look into just in time and just enough access for an employee or for a person to actually be able to perform their job. And then another core principle in zero trust is assume breach. Okay, for zero trust, it always assume that yes, we have already have a breach in the network, we have already have a breach in the organizations. So how do we minimize it? So we are actually expecting that there is how to say identity or actually ID that actually moving around with that is malicious in, and then how do we actually minimize, how do we mitigate the scope of the breach damage? So this is the zero trust control strategy. So this, I will say that in zero trust, our tagline has always been never trust, and you always verify. So for example, for any signal that's coming in to make a decision, so you need to look into verification of device risk. How do you do threat detection? How do you do device management? In terms of the user, we look into behavioral analytics, as I mentioned earlier on, locality of it, multi-factor authentication. How do we do that? And then that move on into decision. What is the organization's decision on that? What's the policy? And then that will actually, we're gonna be, I would say that are bombarded with a lot of authentication requests and so forth. So for the organization, they need to look into authentication and authorization based on context rather than each individual identity. So they need to, like, for example, an employee that is of a C-level, what is the access that can be granted, and then any special exemptions and so forth. So this is how you look into policy and also decision making. And then next we move into the enforcement. We look into what is the policy across the resources, what the policy for us in terms of application, our SaaS, our legacy, our IoTs, our BYOD, and also work from home, how much access they can be granted and so forth. So this is from Gartner. So basically this is a zero trust network access best practices. So first thing they always say, they always advise is to implement it differently than the traditional VPN. Whereas once the VPN is validated, you have actually get to roam around in the castle, and then you get to access applications, you get to access data, you get to access information. So this is something that is, I would say, the reverse of that. Where you look into, once you got into the castle, then this is where you go into different room or micro segmentation. And for each of it, you need to be authenticated and you need to be verified all over again. Then we look into document application usage. So as you say that, as we have mentioned earlier on, data is key. So how do we use the data? How is the movement of data within the organization? And then we also have to look into clean up the access to applications. Applications is also need to assess only basis. And then we have to fine tune the policy continually. So policy in the organization is highly important because that it will be the go-to documents for any dispute or for any, I would say that blurred situation. So what is the company policy? What is our stand in terms of access? What is our stand in terms of access? What are the exemptions, and do we do exemptions in terms of access and authentication? And then this is also in Zero Trust, we always advise in terms of negotiating with business leaders, because Zero Trust network or the Zero Trust strategy, the idea is to be business enabler. It's not to inhibit productivity. It's not to make things tough for business. It's supposed to make business to be at ease, to be secure, and then to be more productive. So for every Zero Trust implementation, it's always advisable for the security or the IT team to sit down with the business leader. What are data critical? What is data important? What is the access that could be that is needed? And what is the I would say that what is the acceptable level of security or level of authentication that is needed in order to make business to be easy and yet to be secured. So this is for the Zero Trust implementation. So there are a couple of things over here. So first thing is identifying and discovering the sensitive data. Know your data. Identifying sensitive data flows. Not all data are created equal, right? Definition and architecture of microparameters. So this is our microsegmentation. Security policy and control framework. So of course, we need to fall back into the policy and framework in the organization. How do we handle the situation and the scenario for every authentication that's coming in? And then continuous security monitoring and intelligence analysis, and security orchestration and automation. So we're going to move into each of the points quickly as we have a little bit of limitation of time. Identifying and discovering sensitive data. So this is where we look into the data classifications. So as we know that not all data are the same. So there are confidential information and data. They are highly sensitive. They are highly valued data in the organization. How do we classify that? So as we know that although data can be parked in another vicinity and so forth and responsibility, however, the responsibility of the data protection and the compliance always remains with organizations. So it always falls back into organization. How do we protect the data? And how do we make data protection and also data management to be easy and also manageable? So this is crucial to do inventory of data. What is the protection level and what's the criticality of the data? Because eventually all the application of processing data had to fall back into the CIA of the data, which is the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of the data. So this is identifying sensitive data flows. So those sensitive data, those high value data, we need to look into how does it flow? Who does the authentication? Who gives the permission? Who approves the access? And how is the movement goes? And then we need to look into who are the one that is requesting the access. So this is where the part of IT and the business staff need to understand the dependency between the application. So from along with the business process, because it actually involves a lot of IT components, the data traffic, and also the required access rights. So this is verifying all the sensitive data flows involves both the IT and the business department. Because as we mentioned earlier on, Zero Trust is actually to be a business enabler. So, and a lot of time business is done with a lot of high value data and sensitive data needed in a nick of time. So how do we manage that? Next is the definition architecture of the microparameters. So this is actually, as we mentioned from the step 1, step 2 earlier on. So this is about the microsegmentation. So this is where we need to do identification of sensitive data repository. So basically we need to implement the need to know and need to do basis. So it all falls back into the least privilege principle for all access controls. So for example, the one all the access and the privilege for the for each of the employee will be based on the job scope. And all this is actually based on authentication too, and also authority. Data owners need to understand and define what roles needs to access the data, to approve the access request, and also the entitlement management. So this is a way that we'll call it like a training where, and how to say, identity actually request for access to the data, and another party will actually approve the access of the data. In order to mitigate or in order to reduce the risk, a lot of time is organization also will do a job rotation in terms of who has the right to approve the access. So this will actually mitigate the risk and also to increase the security of the whole process. And then user entitlement exercise is always a continuous revision and auditing. So what we have planned in the entitlement and also the access rights and authorization from day one will actually be changed from year to year, depending on how the business landscape is changing in terms of how the job scope and also job role of each of the employee is evolving. So security policy and control framework. So this is where we look into what are the internal and the external requirements for the security framework. For each of the different industry, we actually have a different compliance need that you need to fulfill. For example, you PCI DSS or your GDPR and so forth. So what are the external compliance that you need to focus on? And then what are the internal requirements? So this internal requirement would then be translated into the policy. So this also be fall back into the CIA of the data. So some of the decision points in terms of policy and control is looking into the user and the device access. So which are the users and which are the devices that actually have the access and authorization to be granted the permission. And then the IT infrastructure level, and then to access data, and also be looking into the internet and the cloud services. How do we validate that? And then next is the continuous security monitoring and intelligent analysis. So as we know that all the relevant endpoint, the gateways, and also all sensitive data traffic require login and real-time inspection for malicious activity. So how do we do monitoring? So the monitoring are divided into IT operation monitoring, things like your SOC, your SIEM, to process and to correct events, to look into any anomalies, to detect any security incidents and so forth. And then we look into enterprise security, and then we look into compliance monitoring. So compliance monitoring is the part where we look into the business awareness of data processing activities. We look into defining the regular use of sensitive data within the organization itself. How do we, so that this actually can prove to the internal and the external audit, all the relevant controls are in place and effective in terms of security monitoring and also intelligent analysis. So this is the part about the security orchestration and automation. So how do you orchestrate the whole zero trust? So orchestration part is needed in the policy administration. In order to be orchestrated, you need to know what is the totality, what is the overall, what is the big picture of the organization, what are the assets, what are the data, and then how do we grant the access, how do we grant privilege, how do we give the access, how do we grant the authorization, and so forth. So all this is needed at the layer of policy administration. So the orchestration, basically the development of it, needs to be at the policy and administration with the proper and with the right orchestration that would actually enable automation. So automation can come in once that all the scenario or all the level authentication and authorization actually have been spelled out in the policy administration part. So over here, we look into threat and vulnerability management. We look into security incident response. We look into security operation automation. So this is the part where each part of this actually have been discussed and actually have been placed into policy and administration. So what's the benefits of zero trust? Okay, first thing first is, of course, the crown jewel, basically the company data, is to protect the company data. And then this also be able to boost the ability to do compliance auditing, because right from the beginning, we're looking into assess authentication, authorizations, the right to use, and then the least privilege and so forth. And then this compliance will be ongoing and is monitored throughout the time. And then this actually can lower down the breach risk and also detection time. So any anomalies in terms of activity or access requests and everything can be detected right from the very beginning. And this also helps us to improve the visibility into the network traffic. And overall, this actually, zero trust actually increase the control into the cloud environment. So basically, we are moving into the cloud environment with our eyes wide open, I would say. So zero trust is a mindset, it's a strategy. It is not a tool. So, but there are tools out there that enable us to plan for zero trust, for us to make zero trust possible. Of course, zero trust, there is quick wins, things that we can do easier and in order for us to have higher security. And then there is a long-term plan. Zero trust is a long-term commitment and it's a long-term strategy, something that is ongoing, and it is something that need to be revived and relook every year or every 2 years and so. So some of the tools for zero trust are things like your W security, your workforce security, your workplace security, workload security. We need to look into the device security, network security, data security. And of course, if we have tools that can enable us to have visibility and analytics that is much needed, and then automation and orchestration. So with that, I would like to say a big thank you. And zero trust, it is a mindset, it is a strategy, and is something that we need to adopt and adapt into our practice and our organization. The sooner, the better. Thank you.